Welcome to the Unknown Webcast, where those who join us regularly know that I am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. As a result, those who are new should be aware this is not a safe space. If you may be easily offended by having your ideas challenged or by our satire. Today is April 30, 2019, and this is broadcast number 142. This week, our friend and Pastor Rich Day joins us to explain the ways of using apologetics to reach people of other religions. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ron.
He's trying to remember my name, folks. Yes.
I'm trying to figure my name out. That's the problem.
Greetings from sunny and getting warmer Florida, where the palm trees came out, saw their shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsors for this broadcast include World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet and Slippery Slope Ministries. Enjoy the ride while it lasts. Slippery Slope Ministries. And if you enjoy our program and would like to share it with others, or if you just are terribly annoyed by it and want to inflict it on them, to ensure your continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. Well, what do we have going on today, Uncle Don?
Uncle Don reminds me, you and see, Ron used to live in Chicago, and we had a radio guy that we loved, good old Uncle Larry. Larry Lou Jack. Larry Lou Jack. In fact, we liked his farm reports. They were pretty
I actually forgot the farm reports. How about I like John Records Landecker. He was another DJ.
Oh yeah.
Records truly is his middle name because it was a DJ with the middle name Records. I mean, come on,
Can you imagine? You just can't
with a stick.
So leave it to Chicago. Anyway, and for those of you who are my age ish, you might remember when Ron said I was having trouble remembering his name. Actually, I was trying to remember my name, and that reminded me of a commercial, if you recall, Ron, of a woman looking in the mirror asking, who am I? Where am I? I look like a squirrel. Sometimes I feel like that in the morning also. Yeah, Pastor Rich Day is a member of Evangelical Ministries to New Religions and also a newly minted member of the International Society of Christian Apologetics, so he can walk in the world of academics and street fighters at the same time.
And can you chew gum also, though? That's the question.
I don't know, but I told him he kind of looks like Mark Levin, so that's an added benefit maybe, unless you really hate conservatives. In which case,
Mark Levin, or are you? I don't know. Maybe you're not.
So, and he's doing a workshop at our upcoming conference, which is this Thursday in New Orleans, at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. And his workshop is using apologetics to reach people of other religions. So I take it you are interested in evangelism and that you think apologetics may be useful in doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, imagine a pastor that wants to do evangelism.
No, imagine a pastor who wants to do evangelism outside the church. Now that is a concept.
Oh, I know, and it's one that's something I deal with consistently because not only am I pastor in Tallahassee, Florida, I also run the Baptist Collegiate Ministries at the local community college. So I am out there in the trenches consistently dealing with a lot of people who are being told a lot of things that unfortunately they are taking as truth, and reaching them is not always the easiest thing to do, but it's something we absolutely should strive towards.
Yes. One of the things I'll mention, and then I want to ask you some of the things that you're hearing, but a few years back I used to have at one of our local junior colleges, one of the professors would have me in to teach one class on his intro to religions. class, and I would deal with Christianity. Obviously, that was my favorite. And invariably, I would have a student in that class who, at the end during the Q&A, would raise his hand and go, "Well, there's so many contradictions in the Bible." Love that. Love that question.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had like a Jimmy Swaggart floppy Bible. I mean, just great preaching Bible.
You were ready.
And I would hand it to him and say, I've heard that a lot, and maybe you could help me because I've looked and maybe you could tell me where some of these contradictions are at. And they would shy back, and they would go. And the next thing was, well, I've never actually read the Bible. I said, oh, okay. So if you haven't read the Bible, then where did you hear that there's contradictions? And they would say, well, I don't really remember. So I say, okay, so I'm concerned. Maybe you can help me with this, because it sounds to me like you're making an eternal decision based on information that you heard from somewhere that you can't tell me. You don't know if it's accurate or if the source is reliable. Doesn't that concern you a little bit? And then I could go on and describe what are claimed contradictions, which are generally not.
Right.
But it's a good way to kind of open a discussion on the whole question of, is the Bible reliable?
Mm.
Right.
Well, so now when I'm sorry, you go on college campuses. Is that what I heard correctly?
Yes, I go on college campuses, but I also have some other things that I do outside of the church as ministry here in Tallahassee.
I'm just wondering, on college campuses, do you tend to run into any other religions by any chance?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The community college where I am at most of the time, every single Wednesday when I come walking through their student union, there's a table on the left, table on the right.
Mm.
One table's Jehovah's Witnesses, the other table's Mormons, and they're both there every week.
Okay, now they claim to be Christians.
Oh,
yeah,
I know.
Those are people who think they're Christians. How about, do you run into any like Muslims?
Yes.
Okay. Other kinds of, like Wiccans we've talked about.
There's a lot of that here in Tallahassee as well.
Buddhists. So how often? I mean, do they tend to cluster, or do they tend to congregate and birds of a feather, or are they very
not on the campuses? They don't, unless they are there for a specific meeting, or you do have the Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons that do walk around campus specifically trying to reach other people on the campuses.
Okay. So that must create some very interesting conversations. What kind, have you had any recently?
Yeah, I have them all the time. It all depends on how I approach it, with who I'm speaking with and how many people are there. Because I know both with Jehovah's Witness and Mormons, unless you really, and I've tried to teach this on some levels, but it's just really hard unless you have a lot of time to devote to learning this. Both Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and even Muslims and other religions have been taught that, just like Don was just saying, that our Bible is got contradictions in it, or that there are problems with the versions that we use, and only their leaders or their teachers can tell them what is really in the Bible and what to believe in it. And those are difficult discussions at times.
So the well, if you were to talk to the average pastor, I mean, or let's first of all, let's talk about the average pastor. Do you ever go to like meetings of pastoral associations of pastors, local meetings where, yeah. Okay, and do you find a particular pervasive attitude about the kind of thing you do among those pastors? Do they usually slap you on the back and say, "That's great, I wish I could do that," or do they generally maybe not think it's such a great idea?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing that I run into with other pastors is they are kind of like horses with blinders on. That they only see what's right in front of them in a majority of the time, and are not looking at the larger picture. And when we start talking apologetics, some know what they're talking about, some think they know what they're talking about, and some don't know anything about apologetics. And that's that's difficult, which is Don's aware of this. We had an apologetics conference here in Tallahassee a little over a month ago, and that's why we're going to be doing some things here in town to try to help those who don't already have the knowledge to gain the knowledge.
What kinds of things do people who think they know about apologetics but really don't? Well, what kind of things do they say?
Well, again, there's a wide spectrum across with that, but apologetics to them is, for some, just teaching them, hey, this is what the Bible says.
Hmm.
They don't think then how to take it from this is what the Bible says into application and use of what's in the Bible to reach other people.
Or, for instance, okay, now I've told this unbeliever what the Bible says, and he comes up with an argument for why that can't be true. Mm-hmm. Now what do I say? Do these kind of pastors tend to already have that ready or not?
No, not at all. And you're running into a lot of pastors across the board, not just here, that are spending more time as bivocational pastors that are not in the ministry full time, and that's a trend that's been going on for a while. And because of that, a lot of them don't necessarily have the time to get into learning that on their own, without spending a good deal of time that they just simply don't have to do.
So now, then you also mentioned the people who really don't know anything at all about apologetics. Now, I have to admit, I have a stereotype in my head about these people right away, right off the bat. I'm thinking, here's a person who either thinks apologetics is a waste of time, or they just have a concept that totally divorces it from evangelism somehow, or maybe it's only for the flock and not for evangelism, not for use in witnessing. Or is there something I'm missing, or is there another?
Well, how about in that kind of same area of description, pastors or church leaders who view apologists as high maintenance and just troublemakers?
Well, now you're making it personal, Don. Now you've shifted it from apologetics to apologists, and
that's a good point.
Yeah. So in other words, so what you're suggesting though is that their idea of apologetics is tainted by the experiences they've had with apologists, and maybe they think that apologetics turns people into the kind of people. And what kind of people are we talking about here now?
Yeah, well, for a lot of pastors, they don't want to cause any type of controversy within their own church. They think that apologetics would raise controversies and start questions and discussions that they aren't really prepared to be able to get into. But another group of pastors that wasn't mentioned are those that have grown up with things happening in their churches the way they've always happened, using programs they've always used, and they are just not open to going into any new areas aside from what they've already always done.
I mean, after all, how can you live your best life now if you're spending all your time just, getting all defensive about the faith? I mean, come on, right? That doesn't sound like you're living your best life now to me.
Yeah, well, you have someone like now Joel Osteen is maybe to me sort of the epitome of what we're talking about. A man who is represented as a pastor, maybe ordained. Does he have any biblical education? I couldn't tell you if he does or not. But we do know that he stands up each week and says, "This is my Bible," which that's a good thing.
Yeah,
but I don't know that he actually opens it.
Well, I saw a Babylon Bee article, Joel Osteen leaps off the stage to prevent man from opening his Bible. That was a pretty good one. Yeah. I don't know how they got that picture. I didn't know he was engaged in those kinds of things.
So it's, he's a good motivational speaker. Apparently, he's got a large following and sells a lot of books. But it seems to me he would not be really prone to having someone involved in apologetics even attending his church, much less in any kind of a leadership capacity. Why is that sort of style of, quote, Christianity so popular?
I mean, it's our technology and our things that have evolved over the years. We've got generations that are coming up that want uh, more and more of anything and everything, and that's leaked into the church. Where the church, many churches, not all, there's definitely not all, but there's some churches that are doing whatever they can to make it an experience, a concert almost, for people to make them feel good for that hour or hour and a half that they're there. And they think that the bigger, the better, the flashier, they're going to attract more people.
Yeah. It's like I was involved in a little project today where we were moving our library around, and our church library, and we're trying to decide which books to keep and which books to toss out. And there's a lot of like fluff, you might say, that's kind of accumulated in the library. And we're talking about books that, I mean, I haven't seen Joel Osteen's face on a book yet, but I've seen a lot of books that kind of make me cringe. How did this get into our library? Well, it was, there was this family that came 30 years ago and they donated a whole bunch of books. Well, anyway, so that's what they were reading, eh? Okay. Well, I heard this story told by one of the people who've been there longer than I have, that we had a pastor who came and he decided to clean out all that kind of stuff and replace it with all solid theology. People stopped using the library completely in our church at that time. This goes back, well, now it would go back nearly 20 years. Okay. I hope we've changed for the better since then. And I know that even back then there were people who were really, devoted to reading deep theology, but those people tended to have those books in their personal libraries already. So the people who used the library what were they looking for? Well, sometimes, these people were Christians, but sometimes their tastes didn't seem too far removed from, the tastes of people who are checking out Joel Osteen. They're trying to make their lives better, more pleasant, more comfortable. They're trying to solve their problems. They're trying to, they're not. They're really pursuing a more of a life of ease, and using theology as a tool, or using Bible-oriented books as a tool, rather than really seeking God and the knowledge of Him. I guess the show's over now. Okay. So
No. We're listening intently.
Oh, okay. So anyways, how this trace, how we can follow it, the breadcrumbs back to apologetics. Apologetics is a branch of theology. It is the parts of the faith, the parts of the theological content of the Christian faith that we use to defend that faith before the world. When we say to give the reason for the hope that is within you, means that you're giving something of theological substance to somebody.
Right. And as you're mentioning, what we all, well, those of us that are in apologetics will know what you were just saying with 1 Peter 3:15.
Mm-hmm.
But I, in trying to help people see the need and use for apologetics, especially with reaching other religions, I point back into Luke, Jesus on the Emmaus Road, because it was right after the resurrection, and he's walking along the Emmaus Road and runs into two disciples, as the scripture says, and they're still questioning and wondering, and are not sure of any of what has really transpired over the past few days. And as we see in that passage, Jesus calls them out and then lays out for them what the scriptures truly say about him and who he is. And that's where we can utilize apologetics to reach people of other religions, because they have been taught different than we have. And just getting to the point where you understand that when they say the word God or they say the word Jesus, they're talking about someone different than we are, because of their definition of who God is and their definition of who Jesus Christ is. And that's where we need to utilize the Bible and use our scriptures to be able to show them the truth and reality of who he is.
There was an article last week that I came across that said the title of it was "Has Christian Apologetics Failed?" And it's kind of talking about sort of one of the new heroes out there in culture, Jordan Peterson, and how he seems to be attractive to younger people. And yet it seems to many, it seems like apologetics hasn't really done its job. And the author of the article goes through and says, well, what do you mean by failed? Do you mean by that because I have used it and it didn't work that it has failed, or because I don't completely understand it or haven't been trained in it that it has failed, or that I've utilized it and someone still rejected the faith, as though somehow giving the right answer is going to be the cause of coming to faith?
Right.
There's a lot of ways to approach that question.
Well, let's just take the two standard answers in Christianity. There are only two.
Yeah.
One is free will, Arminianism, right, and the other is God chose you and he will, irresistibly call you and you will be saved. Okay, show me in either one of those where apologetics is the decisive answer.
Exactly.
In either one of those. I mean, we're talking about the two main traditions within Western Christianity, at least, going back to the time of the dispute between Augustine and Pelagius. Okay, so if it's my free will, then you can give me all the arguments in the world, and it's still my will. I'm just going to choose what I want to choose. And on the other hand, the Augustinian / Lutheran Calvinistic answer is that the will is in bondage to sin, and until God frees it, it's not going to choose. So in either case, apologetics is used as a tool.
As a tool,
right?
Exactly.
It is used as an important, just like the Word of God is a tool. In fact, really, apologetics is a servant of the Word of God. It is a way of sharpening the focus on what the Scriptures say. And so why wouldn't you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want to sharpen the think about it for a second. One of the things you do in apologetics is you answer misperceptions about the Bible. Like, people say the Bible contradicts itself. Well, show me one. Now, what have you just done there? You've sharpened the focus. You've forced that person to take a closer look at what the Bible really says. And as they look closer and closer and closer, they begin to realize, you're right. There really are no flat out contradictions in the Bible. And now they've got a sharper picture, but they might still walk away unconverted.
Yes, but it's one step closer, because that's
right.
One less objection.
Right.
What about the what's the word? Canard? I like that word. Canard.
Yeah, canard. Yeah, old canard.
That apologetics is merely boundary maintenance. It is only the way to keep the faithful within the bounds of the church without fear of them wandering out into never land of cults or Eastern religions.
What's wrong with that?
Is that true? Well,
what's wrong? What would be wrong with it if it was? Well, is there something wrong with having boundaries? Gee, I mean, you look at the world of counseling. If you don't have boundaries, you're going to get walked on. You're going to get abused. Now, I know that we're equivocating on the meaning of the word boundary here, but in every application of that concept, boundaries are always a defense.
Yeah.
I mean, boundaries, I have boundaries. I put up boundaries. My personal boundaries are, I have so much space. You start to come into my space here, and I start to feel a little threatened, and I'm going to say, could you please back off a little bit? That's defense. Nations have boundaries. We don't really appreciate entire armies crossing our boundaries and coming in and making themselves at home. And we're not unusual in that respect, although if you're in a certain political party, you might think it's unusual. So
how about this? I have a really short answer. How about Acts 20:28-30? Paul calls the Ephesian elders to guard two things. Guard the flock so the false teachers don't creep in, and guard the flock so that you don't have false teachers who rise up from within.
Right.
In other words, that sounds like boundary maintenance to me.
Well, boundary, really what these people I tend to be getting at when they talk about boundary maintenance, the ones that I've talked to, when they start, using that metaphor in Christianity, is they want a flexible definition of what a Christian is. They don't like it when you say, well, if you're saying that these people are in the faith and those other people are out, then you're really talking about, then what you're really deciding is what the faith is. And
so, like a Brian McLaren's generous orthodoxy is neither generous nor orthodox,
right?
Would be an anathema statement to them, right?
Yeah, they want it to be ambiguous. I was working in a liberal seminary from the late 80s to the early 90s, and one of the regular periodicals we subscribed to was the Christian Century. And I can't tell you how many articles, and it's a very liberal regular publication. It was the liberal version of Christianity Today. Now we have to qualify that and say it's even more liberal than Christianity Today. But anyways, it was a pulp magazine. It wasn't glossy or anything. It was written 100% by liberal theologians. And one of the repetitive notes in issue after issue after issue was that now this might have changed. They might have moved on from this since the late 80s and early 90s, but to them, the big difference between theologically conservative and theologically liberal people were theologically conservative people wanted answers. They wanted clarity. They wanted things to be clear and explained and laid out for them. And liberals can have a higher tolerance for ambiguity. You heard this over and over again. They prided themselves in it. They gloried in it. We are the denomination of the ambiguous, okay, or the wing of the church that tolerates ambiguity. And it was very clear at the time that ambiguity extended into the definition of a Christian. The definition of the Christian faith. The Christian faith was becoming increasingly amorphous to these people. And really all the emerging church did with, Brian McLaren and those dudes is they just picked up the theme that had been published in the Christian Century for decades and now tried to inject it into evangelicalism. And they started talking about boundary maintenance and, you really shouldn't be so hard and fast. Brian McLaren would give smart aleck answers about how, well, you must think that the confessions of the Reformation are inerrant and inspired. No, Brian, no, we really don't, because those are the confessions that tell us that the Bible is the only inspired book. So
okay, I'm going to draw Rich in here in a second, but first we probably should hear from one of our sponsors, and I have no clue which one we're doing.
We're gonna, well, we've kind of alluded.
Many have thought I'm clueless, and maybe that's true.
Well, we're going to hear from our friends at World's End Theology Outlet, our one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time is gone. And they ask, are you still trying to figure out how to clean up in the ministry business? Do you want to finally learn how to get to the bottom of growing a successful church? Would you like to flush away your failures and start having your best church now? Well, then you need Charlatan Ultra Soft, because nothing says theologically soft like Joel Osteen's Charlatan Ultra Soft. It's personally tested by the man himself. It provides comfort where it counts. It wipes away even the most stubborn orthodoxy, and it comes with a money-back guarantee. Keep those butts in the pews with Charlatan Ultra Soft, only at World's End Theology Outlet. Get it right now while you can.
And there you go. There you go. Someone did a new book by Joel Osteen, Your Best Teeth Today. So back to Pastor Rich. What are you going to be doing in your workshop? What is your range of discussion?
Well, the discussion centers a little around what we were just talking about with boundaries. What we have gotten to a point, both inside and outside the church, just in society as a whole, where we want our own personal boundaries to be a specific and set way, and we get uncomfortable when those boundaries change. But for people of other religions, a lot of them, their religious faith, their beliefs is not just a part of their faith. It's what their family is a part of, what their society or group is a part of. And when they leave that religion, when they choose to go anywhere else, a lot of them get cut off and don't have any connections whatsoever. And we have found that, at least some of the research I've seen, shows that a lot of those people go into what we call the group of nuns that don't identify as any religion. There was actually a study that came out a couple of weeks back that said that the nuns, the people that don't identify with any religion, is now the largest identifier of people and their religious beliefs, even higher than people with an evangelical background. I've got it right here. The percentage is up to 23.1 of the population in the United States. By contrast, 22.5 say that they are evangelical. So those nuns are out there. But and here's where I'm going to try to go in my workshop. Apologetics for a lot of people has been simply providing a small, quick answer, or maybe even a discussion for an hour or so on trying to help people understand and get past any specific one issue. But apologetics as a whole is supposed to be, in my mind, supposed to be used as something that is not just a one workshop idea. It's a constant walking with someone at times to talk with them, to lead them, to guide them. And for the people that are walking away or questioning their religion outside of Christianity, we can't just take the approach of, okay, well, here, let me give you one quick answer. We've got to take the time to spend time with them to help them build a different foundation from what they've had.
You know, I want to throw this out here. I don't know what you're going to think about this, but one of my themes over the last few years has been that I believe I have a conviction that the church has sort of abandoned, the church in general, not specific churches, but in general, has sort of abandoned the concept of the ministry of the church, which is what happens in the church. That is the training, the discipling, the caring for
Right.
brothers and sisters in the Lord, and replaced it with evangelism. They brought evangelism into the church so that you can have the professionals do the evangelism. So it's sort of become multi-level marketing for Jesus kind of a concept. You know,
Right.
we're not really going to train our people. We're not really going to equip our people. We're just going to get them to go out there and invite someone to the meeting where we'll have a presenter who will do the professional presentation, and over 4, 6, 8 weeks, maybe sneak up on them with the gospel so they can sign on to our multi-level marketing plan. Now, maybe that's crass, but that's kind of the feeling I get. As I go through, for example, 1 Corinthians 14, it seems to me that Paul assumes that the church is for believers and that unbelievers may wander in, but it's not primarily for unbelievers. In 23, he says, if you're all speaking in tongues, and if the unbeliever comes in, and that's just an if they might come in, and they should be welcome, certainly, and the gospel should be clearly understood, but it isn't for them. And 2024 says the same thing. If you're also prophesying, and if the unbeliever comes in, is that true, or am I just imagining something that isn't there?
Well, I think number one, back to your first point of creating the environment and not getting into the teaching and the discipling and all the other things. Absolutely, I think that the church has gotten to that point, and I think it goes back further than just the past few years. I think it goes back into even when I was growing up. A lot of churches were simply telling people, even in church services, hey, all you've got to do, say this prayer and you're good.
And you're done.
Say this prayer, you're done. And they never went further than that, teaching and discipling and helping them to grow in their faith and as Christians. And because of that, we now have a large group of adults who were never trained
And
anything.
so what you have essentially is the same exact, or let's not say that. Let's just say fruit, spiritual fruit that is extremely similar in those kind of churches you just talked about, in liberal churches. Because in liberal churches, what they hear is, it really doesn't matter what you believe. It really, ultimately, it just doesn't matter. And so guess what happens when you keep telling people this over and over and over and over again? Eventually they stop coming to church. And so one denomination, the PCUSA, is losing 1,000 congregations a year on average, or 100,000 members each year. Why is this such a big surprise?
It shouldn't be.
They're kind of used to it, yeah, actually. And you know what? They're really happy because last year they only lost 962 congregations as opposed to 1,000. So
they slowed it a little bit.
Yeah, but when you look at percentages, I think the percentage actually maintains. Well, anyways, in those churches you talked about where you're told all you got to do is just pray this prayer and you're done. Well, if you're done, what more is there to do?
Right.
If I'm done, why come back? Thank you. I'm done. Mm-hmm. See you in heaven.
Yeah. So here's a question then. Here's a question, Rich. And maybe you're doing this in your workshop. So we're trying to get people to go to conference. They can go to your workshop and see you face to face.
Yeah.
Is it the case that apologetics as a tool, and Ron and I are in complete agreement on this, it is a tool. It is not the end. It is a means to an end. It is a tool among other tools that we should be using. But is it the case that we should be, with apologetics and other tools that we have, discipling people into the faith, and then once they come in the faith, to disciple them in the faith?
Correct.
Disciple them into the faith, and then disciple them once they are in the faith. Is that how we ought to be operating?
Oh, it is. But at the same time, going back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago, you have a lot of adults that are still in our churches that don't have that background either, that have been there for some 20, 30, 40 years. So it should, in my opinion, be on a multi-tiered, multi-level way of discipling, where it's not just the people that you're reaching as new Christians, but you also need to make sure that the people within your churches have that foundation as well.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
I think what you're going to find in a lot of churches is that there are people in your pews who you've assumed were Christians for 20, 30, 40 years. They've been coming to meetings. They've been maybe even sharing. Maybe they've been more active than some really born again people in terms of just being there. And a lot of that is simply cultural. A lot of that is simply the way they were raised.
Yep.
And a lot of it is because there's some emotional attachment they have to this building and to these, mainly to the building maybe, but also to the people. Even though the people change over time, they're there and they're not really Christians. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to. I do counseling. I do pastoral counseling. And after a few sessions, I start to really wonder, and these are people who were raised in the evangelical church. These are people who, whose parents might have been active in missions. And I've even talked to some people who had actually gone on missions trips. And after a while, I see all these red flags. And finally I say, tell me something, I have a question. If you were to die today and appear before the gates of heaven, and God were to ask you, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say? And within 10 seconds, I know I'm not dealing with a Christian, that my suspicions are confirmed. And it just appalls me that how many times this has happened. And I know the churches these people are going to, and I know their pastors. How did this happen?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, it's a question that I don't have a full answer to, but the church I'm serving in, the first Wednesday night Bible study that I ever did was basic hermeneutics. Basic, here is how to pull apart a passage. in the Bible to understand its meaning, not just looking at a singular verse, a passage, and how to look at context and how to read your Bible. And I had people after I got done, just that 1 hour, had people come up and say, "I've been in the church for 40 years. Why has nobody ever taught me this?"
Right. Yeah. And you know what? If you study apologetics, you'll learn that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't study apologetics without simultaneously picking up. It might not be a systematic course in hermeneutics, but you will learn hermeneutics.
Mm-hmm.
You will learn principles
Absolutely.
of hermeneutics.
But it's like you guys have been saying, apologetics is a tool. But every tool I've ever used in my life, I had to learn how to use it. I had to take time to learn how to use it properly and to do things well with that tool. And that's where I think in the church we need to make sure that, okay, on Sundays maybe you're preaching more than teaching, but you've got to have more teaching within the churches. You've got to have more of that, and not just in the church, but outside the church. To be willing to sit down and have that day long talk, if you have to, with someone of another religion who's questioning things.
Well, percentage wise, it seems to me, and obviously I could be wrong. I don't do a lot in terms of polls and statistics, and I just sort of guess. But in my experience, as I have spoken in churches, what I find is maybe 8 or 10% of the people present in any church really seriously want to understand how to defend the faith.
Mm-hmm.
Most are just not there, and there's a lot of reasons for that.
Right.
But in those discussions, then what I find is they come to me and they go, "Why am I not learning this in my church? And where can I get more information?" Now I have to deal with a couple of questions because it could be that the pastor's done a really good job and they simply haven't heard. I've run into that. I mean, there's what we say, and then there's what they hear. Right? So you
Absolutely.
have that issue at hand. That's just a very human kind of a situation. Secondly, as a parachurch ministry, I have to be careful how I respond to this to be helpful to them to answer these questions without uh, unwittingly making the pastor of the church look bad, because it may not be the pastor or church's fault. I mean, they did have me in there to speak, so that's a step at least in the direction we want them to go. So how do churches? One of the suggestions I made, I just in our chat area, I sort of suggested this. Today, it seems to me larger churches, as part of their staff, should have someone trained in apologetics, either a trained apologist or someone who is trained in that, either on staff or a very committed church member. Or several smaller churches should band together and support a local apologetics ministry. Would that be helpful?
I think that would be helpful. I think on top of that, just raising awareness of what's actually out there to help people. For instance, the conference we're going to be at this weekend, I think it's the last speaker will be James Walker, and his organization that he works for, the Watchman Fellowship, puts out profiles on any and all religions that are out there, but there's a lot of people that don't know, hey, I can go to this website and get the information. Right. So it's also providing them with that set of tools as well.
Right. And there's good resources. CARM does a really good job. Matt Slick does a really good job over there. Got Questions. Shay does a really good job over at Got Questions. So we have more resources today than we had, 10 years ago, for example.
Right.
When I got involved with this, it was limited. In fact, it seems to me Walt Kaiser in the 1970s had said something like, "We don't really need apologetics anymore. We've kind of solved all of those issues."
Really?
Wait a minute. Okay. Who said that?
Walt Kaiser told that to Norm Geisler, or something like that. Yeah.
You're kidding, really?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm very sorry to hear that.
Well, things have changed. I mean, it's been kind of encouraging to me. 8 years ago or 10 years ago, you had a few apologetics ministries like ours. Today, they are like everywhere. Many of them don't even realize that us older guys have been around doing this for 30 years already. But it's exciting to see them doing that. Now, the problem is many of them are doing it in a more academic way, which
Right.
can be okay, but somehow it's got to get out into the real life of believers at work, for example.
Right. And I've over the past couple of months just been in an area where I've seen, just within my own ministry, I saw God opening some doors that I wasn't really sure what was going on within all of that. But I have recently kind of had an opportunity put in front of me where I've been asked to be a part of a new local radio station that I'm going to have 30 minutes a week where I'm going to devote it to apologetics and take it hopefully out of the academic setting down into where people can understand and grasp and utilize the information.
Right.
But I agree. The academics, one of the first conferences I went to, Gary Habermas was one of the speakers. And as he's talking, number one, my mouth was probably down to here, listening to all this information being thrown at me, but it's all flying up here because I barely grasped what some of what he was saying. And we've got to be able to, as apologists, take it out of that academic setting. And it's wonderful to have it in that academic setting, but for your normal Christian, they're not going to grasp that on the level it's being talked at. You've got to bring it down into where they can utilize it.
Right, or it's really not helpful. I just had a thing. This is kind of a funny story. I was this few days ago. I was at the Witnesses Now for Jesus convention, West Coast. It was out in Sacramento, California. And when I arrived, my transportation to the conference somehow didn't materialize, and I had to call the hotel. So it's an hour and a half or whatever. And after I was picked up, I realized why all of that happened, because the limo driver that picked me up is from South America. And I have 14 or 15 minutes here to talk. And so he asked me, what I was doing. I, as you guys know, I wear a fringe jacket all the time, my cowboy hat and boots. And he remarked on that, which sparked a whole discussion. Well, who are you? What are you doing? And, so I told him I'm a missionary to cults and non-religious, non-Christian groups. So he then tells me he's from South America, been raised Roman Catholic, but left that. He just thought it was just silly, and believes, because of where he grew up at, that we have space aliens that had landed to help the Incas and the Mayans grow, build all of their stuff and all that sort of thing. So that launched us into about a 12-minute discussion on two things. One, what I believe, because he asked me what I believed. And so I laid out, I was raised a Christian. I was raised an atheist. I became a Christian. I gave him the whole process of doing that. And two, I asked him this question. I said, there are aliens out there. There are other life forms. We call them angels, and some of them are fallen angels, whose job it is to deceive. Could it be that those that you think were aliens were actually deceptive demons to confuse people and keep them away from God? And he goes, I've never heard that before. Now, I gave him the gospel, but you only have 14 minutes. However, he gave me his email address, so we're having an ongoing discussion now on these issues, and he's very open. Now, that's only because I have some apologetics background that I could just kind of throw that out there, relaxed, 12, 14 minutes. It wasn't a deep discussion, but enough to just throw out a question. One question is all you really need.
Yeah. But I on that same level, and something we talked about a while back today, there's a lot of people that feel, even within apologetics, that they are never going to know enough, especially your local person in a church, and because of that, feel uncomfortable speaking with people of other religions and other backgrounds, and they fail to remember that it's not their job through a simple conversation to be the singular person that's going to change another person's mind. It's just their calling as Christians to go out and, just like you did, Don, to tell the gospel. What the Holy Spirit's going to do is what God's going to do. I mean, that's that. But I can't hear you, Don.
Who's Don?
Oh, there we are. I had my
There you go.
microphone on. I had turned myself off. Ron alluded to this earlier. I go back. I hearken back to my friend. He's passed away. The late Jan Moskowitz was co-founder of Jews for Jesus, and we'd have him at our EM&R conferences, and then he would stand up, and the first thing he would say is, "I don't like apologists," which got everyone's immediate attention. And he would say, because they think if I give the right answer, they will believe. But faith is an act of the will, not a function of information. Now, it doesn't mean information is uninvolved, but it is not our job to cause belief. We can't do that. That's the task of the Holy Spirit. And so we ought not give up just because I try it once or twice and it doesn't, quote, work, because it's the process of seed planting. Isn't that what Paul says? I plant seeds, someone else waters, but God causes the increase.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
Okay, so back to your workshop here. We're running down about 10 minutes.
right.
So people are committed because they have family or friends that they're going to have to walk away from. How do you overcome that, or do you overcome that?
Well, yes, you can overcome it, but it takes devotion and time. Because you're going to have a lot of people from certain religions, and not all, but some, that are used to, again, this being part of everything, their family, their culture, everything. And when that's gone, they're looking for something to replace that. And you've got to be willing to take the time. And again, it depends on how you look at apologetics. Apologetics is not just a discussion. It's not, and it is a tool, but it can be utilized as a program to help one person as they're seeking something outside of their own faith, to work with them in a devoted manner over a period of time to help them replace what they're walking away from.
Right. Okay. So next, what else will you be covering?
Well, I want to. I'll be covering some of the major religions that are out there, some of the statistics and signs that we see coming from other religions on people leaving the church. As I mentioned before, the nuns group that is growing and growing, even within Catholicism, because of the recent problems within the Catholic Church. People are walking away at very high levels from Catholicism, and even as we think, and I say we, but a lot of people think that Islam, that Muslims is a growing population, not just worldwide, but in the United States. But in actuality, you're seeing a lot of Muslims, when they come to the United States, walk away from their religion.
Right.
And we need to discuss the various ways that we can speak with them and work with them and talk with them as part of apologetics.
Is anybody keeping statistics on that? People who do that, Muslims who walk away?
Yeah, actually, hold on, I'm pulling it up here because I've got it all in front of me. The American population of Muslims has grown 50% in the last decade, but 23% of those that were raised as Muslims have walked away.
And I assume they're walking away into some kind of secularism for the most part.
For the most part, yes.
Yeah, I talked to a missionary to I forget which Islamic nation. He was on furlough. This is 25 years ago or so, and he established a lot of relationships among Muslims in the United States. He said one of the greatest fears of the Muslims who have arrived here is that their children will secularize when they grow up. Apparently it's happening. It's being realized.
Well, I find, again, I can't give statistics because it's just my personal experience, but I find many I have spoken with that are born into Muslim families and raised in Muslim families oftentimes haven't even read the Quran. They've done the rituals and things like that because it's sort of they're culturally Muslims. But when you start talking to them about the difficult aspects of the faith, they will admit, I've never read the Quran. Allah is, God's prophet, and there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And that's really all they know about Islam.
Right.
now you have to build friendships because they have to be able to trust you. Because as you point out, they aren't just leaving a faith system for another faith system. They're leaving family and friends. They're leaving culturally everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But our goal of apologetics when we're doing this is always got to be the cross. Because as you were just mentioning, even with the Muslims you were talking about that only have the identity because of what they've been raised around, they still have a misunderstanding of Allah, of who he really is. That they have a misunderstanding about God. And that's why our goal as apologists has to be the truth of the cross and who Jesus is.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Good. Okay. So you have to kind of be ready to befriend them, to get them attached to others if they come out. You're going to be talking about other religions. What sort of religions are going to be touching on?
Well, I've already mentioned some of them: Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Muslims. I'm either going to, like I just did, speak a little bit about Catholicism, Scientology, a few other of the major religions we encounter here in the United States.
Okay. What about, will you be touching on just like basic doctrine? For example, I wrote a survey, and I wish I had access to it right this minute, but there's something like 80 or 90% of those who were interviewed said yes, in evangelical churches, yes, Jesus is God. And then something like 73% said Jesus is the first creation of God. Does that seem like a conflict there?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it does within Christianity. But for someone that's coming out of another religion, it doesn't necessarily. Because there are some religions that believe that Jesus was the first spirit-born Son of God.
But they wouldn't believe that he is God. Well, Mormons would. He became God. Jehovah's Witnesses would not. But this survey is within evangelical churches. That's what's kind of scary.
It is.
Because you have a really high percentage that would affirm that just Jesus is God, but then an almost equally high percentage that would go on to say he's the first creation of God.
Wow.
There's a disconnect there?
There is, and when we see each other this week, if you could get that link for me, I'd love to read that survey, because that just I utilize information like that within my church to say this is why I teach what I teach.
Right.
Wasn't that commissioned by Ligonier?
I believe it was. Yes, I think that's correct.
Yeah.
So, and maybe if you have that link, you could send it to Rich and I.
I'd have to look it up. But,
okay. That's good. So, Rich, if you were to invite someone to come to the conference, what would you say? Why should they come? Because there's a lot of different things going on there.
There is, and we were discussing before we went on air here today. As I was looking through the setup of the conference, you have a good mix in here of academics and people who are out in ministry, utilizing apologetics, and you've got a good mix of how those two mesh together and how they can be used together. And that's where I would tell people, even if you don't have one side, you can come see a lot about how they both work together.
No, that's good. That's good. All right, cool. So you're going to be there. I'm going to be there. Several of the general sessions actually are going to be broadcast live. I think maybe Facebook is one of the ways that's.
Yes, if you go to the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary Facebook, all of their sessions in their chapel are going to be streamed live.
Okay. And we have a commercial that I just blew right past, and it's kind of bears. Maybe it's a different kind of a conference.
It's a different kind of a conference. Yeah, it's a brief one where it's kind of a courtesy call that we're doing here. You may have heard of Slippery Slope Ministries, where we never let outmoded ideas of truth get in the way of academic freedom. Well, you know what? They're having their first annual theology conference, and in keeping with that, they're issuing a call for papers for this conference. It's open to those with graduate or postgraduate degrees, as well as those enrolled in such programs. And the theme this year is "You Call Us Scholars, We'll Call You Christians." So Please don't forget the Slippery Slope Ministries first annual theology conference. Slippery Slope Ministries, enjoy the ride while it lasts. Okay, so
yes.
There you go. So, yeah, I wish I could be at the conference this year. I hope to be there next year. I had a great time last year. For those listening, it is a marvelous experience, and I think last year, did we have it in March or April or something? Or it was April, right?
It was. I don't know. I don't know. But I don't remember what it was.
So this is a little later.
That was a year ago. I barely remember yesterday.
But
Yeah,
go ahead.
Well, one of the things I want to throw in on that is we talked a little bit earlier is about having tools to be able to use and reach other people. This is a great place to come and find those tools.
Right.
To be able to discuss with other people that have these tools that can help you in using apologetics to reach others.
Right. We've got Growth Ice is going to be there. H. Wayne House is going to be there. And it's a good lineup. We have a good lineup of speakers. So, and we already have next year's dates secured. So once we're done with this, we'll start planning the next one.
Thank you.
Actually, the next two. So, yeah. So with that, we're going to say, Rich, I thank you for being there, and I will see you. I'm going to be arriving tomorrow sometime because we have our board meeting. But then we kick off bright and early. For the members, bright and early on Thursday. For everyone else, we start sharp at 2:00 with the first plenary session on Thursday. So that'll be good. And you can go to the emnr.org to sign up. And join us at the conference.
Absolutely.
And Rich, what is your church so that people that might be in your area could pop in and irritate you? That would be good.
It's Lakeview Baptist Church in Tallahassee, Florida.
Lakeview Baptist Church in Tallahassee, Florida. Ron, would you be kind enough to walk us out of here?
Wow, I would be glad to do that. Okay, our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services come from Chef Hammond Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D. Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Ivana Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for its content. But that you will never, ever be able to prove in a court of law. Not going to happen.
All right, guys, and we're going to say goodbye to everyone out there and hang on for a second.
Okay.